いかがですか? Watanabe Dan desu. On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, we're going to look at the state of the entertainment industry as of July 15th, 2020. This is specifically tied to a date because the entertainment industry is going through the same thing that many people in every industry are going to, and that is the reaction to the COVID-19 virus. Now, I've done these updates in the past, and I've mentioned in very brief passing what the COVID-19 virus has meant in terms of the industry on a very, very superficial level. Today we're going to talk about it on a far more profound level and what it's doing to the entertainment business as a whole. Because, and this is just my opinion, so please do not take this to the bank. My opinion is that the way the industry is responding to the COVID virus is the same way they've been responding to a lot of the challenges that have been presented to them in the past year and a half to 2 years, with the birth of streaming, the extreme money that has been given towards streaming, and consequently with some of the destruction that has happened in terms of traditional business models and how to do things properly. Yes, I do believe that the entertainment industry's response to the crisis has been, to put it rather bluntly, screwed up. So let's go over some of the challenges that are facing the entertainment industry right now. Number one, and this is perhaps the most salient, and that is that because of the inability for people to be in close proximity on a normalized level, we've seen production shut down. And the production shutdown has led to a little bit of a rift between the two sectors of the industry, and that is the above the line, which is the creative side of the industry, and usually the side of the industry that gets paid boatloads of money, and the below the line, which is the craft side, which again, people tend to be very, very well paid. It's a very unionized side of the industry, but it's also a side of the industry that doesn't necessarily give you enough money to where you can go very, very long lengths of time without working. And this is where there's been a little bit of a constriction, and this is where you're starting to see a lot of conflicts rising. What are some of those conflicts? Well, the first of the conflicts that arises is that the above the line side of the industry tends to be very focused on not only what they need in terms of their own protection, but they tend to also at times be very twee in terms of how they react to others who are not so well heeled. It's one thing to say we think that the industry should be shut down until there is no threat from COVID, or if there's an injection that's available and everyone has gone through it. That's very nice when you have several $1 million sitting in the bank. But let's say that you are someone who doesn't have that. You have the bill collector knocking at the door, and sooner or later, the amount of federal money that's available to help alleviate some of this stress will dry up, or will get pushed to such a cataclysmic position that the economy of the country as a whole could really catapult into another depression. We do not want that to happen, by the way, because that will impact everyone. What do I mean that there's a conflict between this? Well, the above-the-liners tend to believe that it's almost a mitzvah. It's a blessing to be able to say that we're going to make sure that everything is 100% safe, and therefore we are going to refuse to perform unless there are certain things that are done. Among the things that have been requested is a reduction of the personnel who will be around, is an insistence that everyone, before they are able to work on a set, must be held in a form of quarantine for up to 2 weeks. And on top of that, after that is over, be tested on a regular basis. Let's say that you are working on a huge budget project. This is absolutely doable. Yes, it will increase the budget quite substantially. But in terms of the overall budget cost, it's not necessarily cataclysmic. On the other hand, let's say that you're dealing with something that's on a tighter budget. In order to have, let's say, even a 20 to 30 day shoot, you're looking at just the testing and the results of the testing, increasing your budget by $180,000. Now on the lower end, the more entrepreneurial side of the industry, which might or might not be union, this is ruinous because you're talking about maybe 20% of your budget over something that will not show up on the screen and will require cutting in other areas. You might say, well, why not just increase the budget to cover that? Okay, well, there's the problem of being able to put together the funds to put your project up to begin with. And this is something that is not changeable. In fact, if nothing else, you're seeing the amount of money that studios are willing to spend, distributors are willing to spend to acquire projects is going the other direction. They're going down. So especially if you're already very, very squeezed in terms of budget, this means that you are not going to be able to do your project, period. And that means that all of those people who might have had a job will not have one. And yes, it's nice to say that, oh, okay, well, it's not that big a deal because you obviously weren't going to make your $5,000 or $6,000 a week on this type of project. But what does it do to people who are trying to enter the industry and get those initial hours done so that maybe they'll be able to rack up the hours to where they can join a union and benefit from those protections? Guess what? That's been shut down too. So yes, there is a problem with that. Now, what's the other problem with that? Yes, having a reduced crew sounds nice. What does that mean in practice? That means that a lot of these below the line, meaning crafts workers, do not have a job. And rather than being pro their constituents, meaning the leaders of the union saying, oh, hell to no, you're not going to cut down the camera crew by 2 people. You're not going to reduce the grip and electric crew by X number of people. We're not going to say that stars are insisting that you can't be on the set with them and that there is going to be no craft service or something. You can't do those things because what you're going to do is you're going to take those workers and get them very angry because their bottom line is being impacted, and their bottom line being impacted is much more hurtful than someone who is higher up in the ranks. So yes, you're going to have that issue. The other problem is that we are looking at California right now. And California is one of the states which, for better or for worse, is very much trying to make sure that everyone is protected, with many of the decisions coming from up high where the concern for entrepreneurial, which is about 80% of the jobs in the state. So do not think that this is just a bunch of poor people that can be easily kicked to the side. That there is a side of the state's economy is being really pinched. So there's not a lot of love for that, and you're seeing a lot of the productions, even among people who are in the above the line side, the creative side, choosing to run away because there's not as many restrictions in a state like Georgia. So on the one hand, you say that Georgia might be a mess right now and that they don't really have their act together and there's a lot of confusion. That's very true. But the bottom line is Georgia's trying to figure it out. Meanwhile, that means that anyone who's wanting to do a production is going to say, okay, Georgia's going through a momentary readjustment. That will be fixed. California is going through increased shutdown, which means it won't be fixed, which means that more and more productions are going to choose to go to more favorable territories. And if they're not going to be found in other states, they're going to be found in other countries. The industry has gone through an incredible period of runaway production, hurting it very badly for a period of almost 20 years. It was only with the California government being willing to do incentives to keep production in California and Los Angeles in particular that the big runaway was ended. This looks like it's going to be encouraging runaways once again. This is not good for anyone who is based in the Southland. So that's an issue. Now, let's go to the things that have been impacting the industry for a longer period of time that have come and made this situation with COVID-19 even more challenging. The first and most important of these is the loss of multiple windows. And what does that mean? Well, in the past, When a movie or a television show was created, there were multiple numbers of ways for the money that cost the production to be recouped. Number one, we'll start with the motion picture side first. Number one was theatrical. Now, I know that there's been a lot of talk how theatrical has become a loss leader, meaning that it doesn't really account for the bulk of the revenues that a movie makes anymore. But it's still a substantial part, and certainly, if nothing else, the advertising that's spent to support a theatrical release is definitely something that supports its down the line money. The secondary window was physical media. And physical media, DVD, VHS, Blu-ray, whatever it was, used to be the largest sum of money that was coming in. For a long time, it was considered that streaming was merely going to knock out physical media as something that was the biggest source of revenue. And that would be fine because you would still have the windows after it. And besides, there's something nice about about not having to worry about storage for physical media. There's something nice about having something available when you want it, whenever you want it. So that looked good. But it turned out, in effect, to be a false friend, faux ami, if you will. And the reason for that is that what that streaming window did is, rather than just replacing physical media, it knocked out everything that came below physical media as well. What do I mean? After physical media, there used to be a pay window, a pay cable window, and that would be when a movie would have its exposure on HBO or Showtime or one of the premium services. And even though that was not as large a chunk of change as would come from the world of physical media, it was still a substantial amount of money. That in turn would be followed by in the earlier days, it would be followed by a network television premiere. Now that window has pretty much disappeared too, but nonetheless, there were for many years a network window that was very, very nice. It provided a big chunk of change. The window after the network television premiere would be the free cable window. And that would be the stations that specialized in movies and all of that. And that would be where a film would get rerun for quite a while. Beneath that was what was called the first run syndication window, where it would show up on your local station as part of a package of newer films under a slightly different business model, where the producers and the distributor would share directly in the ads that would be sold on a national level. I know that's a complicated, don't worry about it. Then there would be the free model, which would be when it would be sold as part of a cash package with a bunch of other films, and the TV station would run it whenever they wanted. It would be something that they would have part of their regular programming. For many objects, there would then be a second run where the movie would be 5 years plus older, and it might come back as a rerun again and again. For example, take a look at something like Lifetime, where you would have a relatively low-budget movie run as one of the Woman in Jeopardy films. And those tended to develop quite a cult following, and then they would be repurposed again later on as a second run. Things like Desperate Housewives before they were desperate or something like that. So you would have revenue streams come in for initially 5 years, and then it could continue to generate revenues forever after, sort of like a rerun of a television series. What's happened with streaming is, because you can get whatever you want whenever you want it, rather than something show up and people surf in and out of it, they have to actively choose it. Now, let's be real. No matter how much advertising you do, no matter what you put on your splash page, a B-level title is never going to attract the attention of an A title. I can't tell you how much of television and cable were actually based on surf in, surf out. Meaning you're sitting there with your remote control and you're going through every single station. You see something that looks interesting, you stop and watch it for a particular amount of time. That would result in a ratings click. That would result in money being returned to the distributor, whether it be a pay cable station, whether it be a free cable, whatever. It was still money coming in. Under streaming, this level of B and C content is now gone. So that means that whatever money you make from your initial streaming purchase might be all you ever make. That has created a problem because when Netflix first started, Netflix came in as the only provider of streaming content. And because the subscriber base was growing incredibly rapidly, Netflix's revenue was rising astronomically year after year. So it really didn't matter how much they were spending on any individual project because the number of new subscribers would cover any kind of overage. When you don't have the economic hazard of needing to have an immediate return on investment that made sense, there becomes a moral hazard where there's no incentive to control costs. And what that resulted in terms of Netflix was catastrophically increasing budgets for every single episode of a new series. And when you look at something like House of Cards, yes, it was an extraordinarily well-written project that had an incredible amount of people wanting to binge watch it because every single episode was so fantastic. The challenge with that was that real life interfered and Kevin Spacey got caught up in the Me Too movement, which meant that the show never had a satisfactory conclusion. That precludes its ability to get put into the rerun cycle in any way. Plus, with the destruction of physical media, that meant that Netflix no longer could rely on money coming in from box sets and all of that, as people who loved the show decided to collect it and continue enjoying it on an ongoing basis. That lack of an ending removed that incentive. We'll notice the same thing happen with HBO and Game of Thrones. The fact that Game of Thrones last season was such a disaster meant that Game of Thrones lost its ability to be rerun into eternity. Unlike something like Lord of the Rings, unlike something like the Harry Potter series, you now have an asset that costs nearly $1 billion being worthless. Now I know that it has reappeared on Amazon Prime, but I can tell you dollars to donuts that it is not getting the viewership that Amazon thought it would be getting. Why? Because it was considered bad. Why would you invest the time equity of your life to watch a series that everyone was talking about and that you were excited at seeing at some point and you didn't want to lay down the long green to buy the DVD box set, and now you've heard the show ends badly? Why would you invest the time and the money to watch something that you know is not going to end on a satisfactory basis? So there we go. We now have a dead asset at HBO. True, they thought that that was fine to screw up a show that had gone on for the better part of a decade, increasing deficits every step of the way, because they had a new show that everyone was supposedly going to be enjoying, watchers, right? And that has failed. So now HBO doesn't have a reason for people to buy their service on a regular basis, and we're seeing the consequence. We're seeing churn. We're seeing people drop it. Now, Netflix has certainly benefited from CV19. And that's because with people stuck at home, they have started subscribing to it. This allowed certain other aspects of the industry to be revealed as being a false potential source of revenue. Chief among those was Walt Disney Company. Walt Disney felt that with Disney Plus, they would be able to tackle the Netflix monster and cause a real war, where Disney's brand would be so strong that by not having their content available on Netflix, people would naturally opt for Disney. And obviously HBO felt the same way with HBO Plus, NBC recently with Peacock, CBS with their service, and everything was predicated on the public wanting to buy ever-increasing numbers of streaming services without everything being aggregated into one site the way it had been under Netflix. Guess what? The average person in the public kind of liked the idea of being able to cut the cord and not have a big cable bill every month. Now you have 8 or 9 services that you have a choice of getting, which means that you will no longer have a cable bill where you get all of this stuff, but you're going to break it out into individual pieces. What was not expected, although anyone who looked at the market research would have said, don't anticipate that every one of these services will be able to follow the number of Netflix. Remember, Netflix was the pioneer. Remember, Netflix used to have everything. Remember, Netflix is like Amazon. It becomes the norm. If you're Barnes & Noble, this means you're screwed. So this was something that was not taken into consideration in upper-level business meetings. So basically, it's turned out that Netflix is still the jolly green giant in the room. More people have stuck with Netflix than have sampled Disney Plus. Now, yes, when Disney Plus had Mandalorian, that was fantastic. And they started getting numbers that would equate to the numbers Netflix was picking up on a monthly basis. Here's the problem. Mandalorian ended. And Disney had perceived that with Mandalorian ending, they might lose a quarter of their subscribers. Well, they lost almost half their subscribers, around 40%. That is a massive disaster. So what's the problem here? Well, Disney, yes, it has an incredible library of very, very great intellectual property. Their old films and all of that. How long does it take you to actually blow through every one of those films? How many times do your kids want to see Frozen again and again? Okay, I know it's endless. It's true that Disney had the benefit of having the older set subscribing to it because, hey, grandkids come over all the time, and plus, isn't it fun to revisit the Ugly Dachshund and the computer wore tennis shoes and Escape to Witch Mountain and things that we had when we were growing up and we have fond memories of. Guess what? As Grandpa and Grandma sit there and watch this stuff from their own youth, they said, you know what, this stuff is actually kind of sucks. And even though I enjoyed that little trip down memory lane watching Herbie the Love Bug, I don't really need to do that on a regular basis. I couldn't really care less about most of this content. So now you have an incentive to, outside of when the grandkids are coming by, to not really have the channel anymore. You're going to go back to Netflix, which has more adult content, which is something that you've gotten used to experiencing. So what's happened is that Netflix has remained the dominant source. But Netflix has another problem, and that is that Netflix has a lot of debt. Not only that, but during the time that Netflix has been enormously successful, it has grabbed a large percentage of the people who wanted to get a streaming service, the people who needed something like that, already having got it. That means their subscriber base isn't necessarily going to be increasing year over year anymore. Why is it that physical media started falling down? Quite simply because over 90% of the country had a DVD player. And once you have 90% of the country having a DVD player, there aren't going to be new people coming in and buying a DVD player for the first time. Most of that's going to be replacement, which means that a lot of the titles that they would have wanted have already come out. And while it's nice to say, well, people will buy, 20 copies of Gone with the Wind, the reality is a lot of people are fine with just one. And they don't care if you totally did a restoration. They're fine with their one copy. So you reach a point where you can't have any further new consumers. So you're basically sustaining. Now, to its credit, physical media has had an improvement over the past quarter, and it's gone up almost 30%, which is a nice thing. I believe that that's because people got scared with HBO Plus pulling Gone with the Wind. What a stupid move that was. You have your number one title of the largest library or the most valuable library overall, RKO, United Artists, Warner Brothers, and MGM, all in that library, and you've taken their number one asset and trashed it. Not only have you trashed it with the new wraparound commentary on it, but you've been doing the same thing to cartoons. Can we say that now you've trashed another one of your prime assets with kind of an arrogant attitude? What's wrong with the people who are in charge of that side of Warner Brothers? They obviously are not paying attention to their actual cash flow, to the actual audience that they have outside of their friends who go around in their cocaine and canopy parties and talk about how stupid their audience is. No, that's the wrong attitude toward your buyers. So we're seeing a situation where why would somebody subscribe to HBO Plus now? Why would somebody go away from Netflix, especially if they're squeezed on economics, which they are because of COVID? So you have a real conflation of all sorts of bad things hitting at the same time. Let's add to that the industry really pushing a lot of virtue signals, but when the rubber meets the road, proving that they don't really believe it. Let's talk about what has the industry been mentioning incessantly. They're talking about wanting greater diversity. Note that greater diversity is never, well, we're going to replace everyone on the above the line side, on the creative side, with non-Caucasians. Remember, I'm a non-Caucasian too, so I can say this kind of stuff. Instead, what they're doing is saying we're going to go after the crafts and insist that the crafts have a certain percentage. Because, we can't do it with the above the line because that's where our money comes from. If we don't have this certain star, we're not going to get as much in terms of money back or in terms of investors. Okay, that's a nice thing to say. So you go in there and you start putting out word. This happened with the Editors Guild, that we're looking specifically for black editors. There's nothing wrong with someone being a black editor. It's great. If you've achieved that, knock yourself out. Congratulations. However, by putting out word that you're only looking for black editors, guess what you have now done? You have violated the Civil Rights Act. You can't say that. You can't put a racial bend on something any more than you can put a sexual end or a religious end. You can't say we're only hiring Catholics. Sorry, that's not going to work. So now you have an issue, and you have California saying, well, don't worry about that. That's just stupid federal law. We're going to get rid of our civil rights law here to where we will allow quotas. No, you won't, because you still have the supremacy clause that you can't violate federal. So now you've opened up the door to have these editors sue you because you've put it in writing all over social media. What do you think that's going to do long term? Now you've infuriated your crafts class more than ever because you're putting out in public that you're about to do racial norming. No good. You can't do that. Secondarily, a lot of people are being put in jobs above their pay level. And it's nice to give people an opportunity. But if you put someone in a job, in a craft where they're incompetent, and you need to hire a second person to actually do their job properly, you've now screwed your budget again. You've now increased your cost. And while you can advertise that you did this, you've also, because there's a limited number of people who are trained in specific crafts, that you're paying people more than the average rate for being incompetent. That doesn't work long term. Further, now this is where the hypocrisy comes in. While there's talk that we want more above the line people who are non-Caucasians to come in, you have an example of a massive hit, which was Hidden Figures. Now, Hidden Figures was female-oriented. It was about female empowerment, and it was about African American, black empowerment. Where's the follow-up? There isn't one. What do I mean by where's the follow-up? This thing's 3 years old now. What did it show? It showed that there's a tremendous crossover audience for female-oriented films that are well-written and have a strong female lead in the center who can be minority. All right. Where's another film that fits those same parameters? Can we say it doesn't exist? Hollywood has decided, instead of going after that, let's put Ava DuVernay in charge of another DC Universe movie. Okay, that's nice. Why put Ava DuVernay there? Her skill came initially from being a very strong filmmaker of interpersonal stories. When she has had a bigger budget with something like Wrinkle in Time, it failed. Selma was a solid film, but it didn't make money. Now she's had the series on the Central Park 5, which was really well done. It was too expensive. What is it going to take for Hollywood at some point to say, why do we keep hiring this woman who makes films that cost a lot of money, don't return their investment? Be careful, Ava. This is going to bite you in the rear end. If your DC Universe movie bombs, trust me, Hollywood has no problem saying that you're not box office and that you're not going to get hired anymore. It doesn't matter what kind of virtue signal they want to put forward. At the end of the day, stockholders are going to say, what the hell are you doing as a business? Note what happened with Disney. Once Disney's parks stopped being able to be open, and that $30 million a day they had in revenues, not profits, coming in from those parks, all of a sudden, mismanagement became noticed. Stuff that had passed as being cool, whatever. But, okay, yeah, Han Solo was a $40 million loss, but that's only 10 days or so of revenues from our parks. Well, you don't have those 10 days of revenues from the parks to cover that anymore now, do you? So now people are starting to look at the way money was spent at Disney, and they're going, wow, you spent $4 billion for the Star Wars franchise, and you have pissed that away. Why? Why are you still doing it? Why are you tripling down on disaster? Why is it that you've kept management in place when they have proven to be ineffective? Doesn't matter that the force is female, because it wasn't. The audience has clearly rejected that. So what are you doing? Oh, let's look at another one of Disney's assets, ABC. Why has that been in free fall for the past 10 years? Why has not that been able to reduce its collapse? Oh, what else have you done? You got rid of a show called Last Man Standing. Fox picks it up. It becomes one of the number one shows on network. What are you doing? Roseanne, a number one show. You cancel it. Good job. Now you've gotten rid of two huge hits. ABC, what's wrong with you? Now let's move over to Pixar. Pixar had its first big bomb this year. Okay. What's wrong with that? What's happening with Marvel? Oh, yes, the films have been fine, but guess what's just ended? That whole series of films have just ended. And we were supposed to develop new films from the IPs from our comic books. Well, the comic books have, the relaunches and all that have all been failures. Now you screwed Marvel up. This is the kind of thing that's being noticed now. This is not good for the long-term health of the industry. Now, I spent a lot of time complaining about what's happening. Here's the plus. There has to be a renaissance in lower budget projects. Let's return to Netflix. What has Netflix just done? Netflix has just picked up Unsolved Mysteries. And what's Unsolved Mysteries? Yes, it's an old title that's very familiar, has a lot of really, really strong nostalgic appeal to it. But there's something else very important about Unsolved Mysteries. It's cheap. And what do I mean by cheap? Let's put it this way. You can do a whole a whole season of Unsolved Mysteries. That's 22 episodes for probably the cost of one episode of Umbrella Academy, which in turn only has 10 episodes a season. Which means that in order for that to ever have any kind of hope for rerun in the future, where you need 100 episodes, that thing has to run for 10 years. Will it? No. Is it something that audiences love? Yeah, they like it, but are they passionate about it? Are they loving it? Are they binge watching it? No. They're watching it. Maybe they're even making it all the way through the 10 episodes. But is it something that everyone's excited about? Is it something that people are going to buy Netflix for? The answer is no. Look at what happened with The Irishman, where 175 million was spent on a film. We all know what Netflix was trying to do with that, which was to enter the world of theatrical film production, where this would be their big picture. Hopefully it would win Best Picture and all of that. Disappointment. If it had cost $50 million, they would have released it theatrically. Don't believe the spin that Netflix said. They would have released it theatrically if it had cost low enough. But when they tested it and it wasn't getting enthusiastic response, they knew that if they released it theatrically, it would bring probably no one in when it finally had its Netflix premiere. If it had been big, the way Avengers Endgame had been, trust me, they wouldn't have cared. They would have loved it. They would have let it run for 6 months and then put it on Netflix as a, now you saw it in the theater, now watch it again. They didn't, because they realized that the title, if they released it theatrically, would be burned out. Because people would say, oh, it's good, and it's also 3.5 hours long, and I was bored, quite frankly. So that means that no one has the heat to watch it. That means no one has the heat to buy at least a month worth of Netflix. And so that was a big debacle. So now they've scaled back. The other issue that has come out is that Endeavor got rid of a third of its employees. Now, what's Endeavor? Endeavor is the biggest agency in town right now, William Morris Endeavor. 2 years ago, and last year, and even the beginning of this year, they were part of 80% of every single project that was being picked up on the high end. That was feature films, that was streaming series, and all of that. So you would have thought that they were about as rich as humanly possible. Here's the problem. They were spending every bit as fast as they were as they were bringing it in. And if you think about the prodigious amounts of money they were bringing in, this is pretty a shocking thing. And Endeavor made the mistake, what they didn't perceive it as a mistake at the time, but of going public and saying what was, in retrospect, a stupid line, which was that, well, we can't make our money on just representation. We have to have part of production. We have to be this vertically integrated company. And so they were going to do an initial public offering and take the company public, secretly, because they were so much in debt. They had so much venture capital pouring in that they had no choice in the matter. Here was a problem. You have the old pesky MCA decree from early 1960s sitting there, when Lew Wasserman, who was in charge of Universal at the time, and also Music Corporation of America, MCA, that he was forced to make a choice between continuing in representation or moving into production. He wisely chose to move into production, and the MCA decree says that an agency cannot have ownership stake in production. Now, yeah, individual agents can have up to 3% of their of 3% of a production company and all that, and that led to some confusion on my part even. But they could not, as a whole, with all the agents within the company, own more than between 10 and 20% of a production entity, meaning that no matter what, they were no longer going to be, they could in no way be majority shareholders. Well, the SEC took one look at that and said, what the hell are you doing? You're coming here with something that has something that's illegal in your business plan? Rejected. And I, for a while, was thinking, why would they even do that? You have a bevy of high-priced Beverly Hills lawyers who are watching this stuff like a hawk. How could they miss that this law that's been in place since the early 60s was going to block this from happening? It was a Hail Mary pass. They had no choice. They could not have kept the company private any longer. They had to take it public because their cash flow situation was dire. So, if William Morris Endeavor is in that kind of trouble, imagine what that means for every other agency in town. Imagine what that means for the negotiation between the Writers Guild and the agencies. Because the Writers Guild was trying to get rid of packaging, which is where an agency puts together all the elements of a film, with their own people, gets a percentage of the budget, gets a percentage of the back end and all of that, which is how the agencies were making a lot of money, cutting out the role of the independent producer. And now that's fallen apart. So we're seeing the Writers Guild strike perhaps going to be settled in favor of the Writers Guild ultimately, because it looks like none of these agencies now can even afford to think of having a production entity enfolded under them. So we're in a challenging time in the industry. That doesn't mean anything, because there's always been challenging times. I feel that, and I know I'm a broken record on this, that entrepreneurial lower budget films will be staging a comeback on the backs of things like Unsolved Mysteries, where Netflix, in order to keep the beast filled, has got to have ever more content coming in. Well, as long as the industry isn't really geared up, that's not going to happen. So we're still in the stage where a lot of this stuff is tentative, but isn't it exciting to watch it all shake down? Isn't that why we love the movies? Because even in their method of production, there can be a lot of drama.